In 1976, a railway opened in East Africa that Western bankers said was impossible to build. Today, that same railway line carries a secret. It was never really about trains, it was about power. While America spent trillions fighting wars in the Middle East, China was quietly writing checks across Africa. Not for military bases or oil fields, but for something far more valuable: loyalty. Here's the number that should terrify Washington: $280 billion. That's China's annual trade with Africa, more than the US and UK combined. But this isn't just about money, it's about the most sophisticated influence operation of the 21st century, hiding in plain sight behind concrete and steel. Today we're exposing how Beijing turned an entire continent into its sphere of influence, and why the West woke up too late to stop it. The railway that changed everything. To understand China's dominance today, we need to go back to 1965. Tanzania and Zambia had just gained independence, but Zambia faced an existential crisis. They were landlocked, sitting atop vast copper reserves, but the only rail routes to the sea ran through white minority regimes in Rhodesia and apartheid South Africa. Desperate, they turned to the West. The World Bank's response? The project was economically unviable, too expensive, too risky. Western donors told Zambia to keep using the old colonial routes. It was a humiliating rejection. So they flew to Beijing. China was in the midst of the Cultural Revolution. Its economy was weak. Food shortages were real. But Chairman Mao saw something Western bankers didn't. According to diplomatic accounts, he told them that although China had its own hardships, it would help build the railway even at great sacrifice. And China followed through. By 1970, tens of thousands of Chinese workers arrived in Tanzania. The project was brutal. Workers tunneled through mountains, bridged flood-prone rivers, cut through bush filled with lions, malaria, and tsetse flies. More than 60 Chinese workers died during construction. When the Tazara Railway opened in 1976, it triggered a geopolitical shockwave. It proved something revolutionary. African nations didn't need Western approval to build mega infrastructure, and China didn't need immediate profit to gain influence. While Western governments spent decades lecturing African leaders on austerity and governance, China could simply point to the tracks and say, "We were here when nobody else was." Tazara wasn't just a railway, it was a lost leader that laid the foundation for everything that followed. The Angola Model, infrastructure for oil fast forward to 2002. Angola has just emerged from a 27-year civil war. The country is shattered, roads cratered, bridges destroyed, unexploded ordnance everywhere. They desperately need billions to rebuild. The West responds with conditions. Yes, we can lend you money, but first we need transparency, anti-corruption reforms, human rights improvements, full auditing of state oil revenues. While Angola is locked in tense negotiations with the IMF, China walks in with a radically different offer. No governance lectures, no transparency requirements, no budget audits. China simply says, "We'll take the oil." This became known as the Angola Model, and it would reshape development finance across the global south. Here's how it worked. China's Export-Import Bank extended billions in credit backed by future oil deliveries. The money didn't flow to government accounts, but went directly to Chinese construction firms operating in Angola. These firms built roads, hospitals, housing blocks at remarkable speed. Angola repaid in oil shipped directly to Chinese buyers. No missed payments, no currency risk, no IMF oversight. For Angola's leadership, it was almost magical. They got visible reconstruction without Western scrutiny. For China, it was a strategic coup. Long-term, energy supplies and guaranteed contracts for Chinese firms. But there was a catch. Chinese workers flew in by the thousands to build highways, while unemployed Angolans watched from the roadside. The infrastructure arrived, but job creation often did not. Despite its problems, the model worked and China exported it. Democratic Republic of Congo for copper and cobalt, Guinea for bauxite, Zimbabwe for minerals, Ethiopia and Kenya for transport corridors. The debt trap detective. This brings us to the accusation everyone's heard: debt trap diplomacy. The story usually goes like this. China lends money for a project it knows won't pay off, then seizes the port or airport when the country can't repay. But here's the reality. There is no documented case in Africa where China has seized a government asset outright because a country couldn't pay its debt. Take Uganda's Entebbe airport. In 2021, headlines screamed that China could seize the airport. Panic ensued. But when researchers examined the loan terms, there was no verifiable clause that automatically handed the airport to China on default. Even Chinese diplomats explicitly rejected the idea. So what's actually happening? Rather than repossessing assets, Chinese lenders typically restructure debt, renegotiate terms, or extend payment schedules. But here's the subtle trap. Some Chinese loans include stringent clauses, secrecy provisions, or revenue ring fencing that can limit a borrower's financial autonomy. This creates leverage. When debt becomes unsustainable, a borrower has more reason to prioritize agreements with Beijing over other creditors. That's the real trap. It's not losing your airport. It's losing your negotiating power and fiscal flexibility. Beyond concrete, the digital Silk Road. While everyone stares at the railways and ports, China has been quietly building something far more powerful: Africa's nervous system. If you're watching this on a smartphone anywhere in Africa, there's a high chance your data is passing through Chinese-built infrastructure. This is the digital Silk Road. Huawei is the backbone. While the US and Europe were banning Huawei over security concerns, African governments were signing contracts. Why? Because Huawei offered what Western firms didn't: lower prices, end-to-end infrastructure, and financing bundled with the tech. Today, Chinese firms are involved in building or upgrading telecom networks in more than half of African countries. But it doesn't stop at phones. China has exported safe city systems to Nairobi, Johannesburg, Kampala, and Addis Ababa. Thousands of CCTV cameras, centralized monitoring hubs, AI-assisted video analytics, including facial recognition. The pitch is crime reduction, and sometimes it works. But the same technology that catches criminals can also track journalists, activists, and political opponents. China follows a strict non-interference policy. They don't ask how the technology will be used. They don't attach democracy clauses. If you want to use AI to catch thieves or track protesters, they don't judge. They invoice. The Spy Tower, African Union headquarters. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. In 2012, China gifted the African Union a gleaming $200 million headquarters building in Addis Ababa. Every summit, every negotiation about Africa's future happened inside a building designed and wired by Chinese firms. Until 2017, when AUIT staff noticed something odd. Every night between midnight and 2 a.m., the building's servers experienced massive data spikes. No meetings, no staff, no work. So where was the data going? According to investigative reports, internal scans allegedly revealed that large volumes of AU data were being transmitted to servers in Shanghai for nearly 5 years. Emails, memos, audio recordings, strategic documents from heads of state. Chinese officials categorically denied the allegations. No conclusive forensic report was released, but the AU quietly replaced its servers and stopped using Chinese contractors for sensitive IT infrastructure. Here's the stunning part. There was no diplomatic meltdown, no collapse of relations, no sanctions. African leaders largely downplayed the story. Why? Because by 2017, the relationship had already gone too far to unwind. You don't publicly accuse your largest financier, builder, and trade partner when you still need the next loan. This is the true nature of China's soft power. Not affection, but dependence. The critical mineral chokehold. Let's talk about what powers your electric car. If you own a smartphone, a laptop, or EV, there's a high chance a critical component inside began life in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The DRC produces around 70% of the world's cobalt. Chinese companies control the majority of industrial cobalt mining operations. China refines roughly 75–80% of global cobalt output. This isn't just about batteries, it's about energy independence, industrial dominance, and technological sovereignty. The West now openly acknowledges they miscalculated. While Western policymakers focused on oil and semiconductors, China quietly locked down mining rights, refining capacity, and logistics. By the time Washington realized cobalt was critical, the market was already cornered. The new Cold War. For years, the West watched China's expansion with arrogance and denial. They assumed African leaders would eventually grow frustrated and return to the familiar Western model. They were wrong. By the time Washington realized what was happening, China didn't just own the room, it owned the building. But the era of Western complacency is over. In 2022, the G7 announced the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, $600 billion by 2027 to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. The message was clear. We can build roads too, and ours come with transparency and political choice. Meanwhile, African leaders have learned from the first Cold War. They're not choosing sides, they're playing both superpowers against each other, and for now, it's working. The verdict. So is China Africa's savior or colonizer? The honest answer is, it depends. If you're a farmer who can finally get produce to market because of a Chinese-built road, China looks like a savior. If you're a factory owner who went bankrupt because you couldn't compete with Chinese imports, China looks like a predator. If you're a dissident whose face was scanned by Chinese surveillance before security forces knocked on your door, China looks like a threat. All these realities exist simultaneously. But here's what cannot be denied. China took Africa seriously when much of the world did not. They saw opportunity where others saw instability. They saw markets where others saw charity cases. And by doing that, whether out of strategy or self-interest, they forced the rest of the world to wake up. Africa is no longer a peripheral player. It's becoming one of the defining arenas of the global economy. So the question isn't who will own Africa. That belongs to the colonial past. The real question now is, who will Africa choose to partner with? And for the first time in modern history, that choice is genuinely theirs. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and let me know in the comments.